have the support of members of his own party in the House of Representatives. 70 Democrats voted for a resolution to curtail the U.S. Support for this operation today in the House. Basically, look, another thing that's not being reported, there are some rebels who have gone back to Gaddafi. We have seen reports of NATO hitting rebel columns. There are other reports that these may be rebels trying to get back to Tripoli to rejoin Gaddafi. Gaddafi's given amnesty to these people. Many former rebels, including one I spoke to, said, look, we weren't happy with Gaddafi, but when we saw NATO, including Italy, our former colonial occupier, join this thing, and now there's some question whether Italy wants to participate in this any longer. They're saying, okay, he's a dictator. We've had him around for over 40 years, but darn it, he's a Libyan nationalist, and he has given us the highest standard of living in Africa.
The really interesting thing to me, just to focus it back here in the U.S., is that...
Hello. So, let's see here now. We're going to cut away to Hillary Clinton talking about 5 days after her it's too late secretary refused to have elections held within 90 days, as the Gaddafi's had indicated they would be willing to do, internationally monitored elections within 90 days. Now here's what she says 5 days after that. Let's see if I can get this to work. Sorry for the delay.
You earlier on spoke about the emergence. You earlier on spoke about the emergence of the Arab dawn, where we saw radical transformations happening in North Africa. Most recently, we've seen the United Nations through Resolution 1973 authorizing NATO and a coalition of countries to engage in military operations in Libya. However, a lot of people have been critical of these operations, saying they now amount to a regime change process where not the protection of civilians has been the principal interest, but it appears that taking out Muammar Gaddafi has been the priority for the NATO coalition.
You know, I think, Chris, that's a misperception, but I understand it because you know, NATO and Arab states that are flying with NATO are trying to protect civilians, and the goal is to get a ceasefire from Gaddafi's troops. Unfortunately, that has not happened. He continues to order attacks. You know, Misrata was under siege, and really the opposition fighters inside Misrata withstood an enormous deluge of brutal attacks, not just from the outside in, but you know, placing tanks and other equipment inside Misrata. So the Gaddafi forces were driven out. Now they're trying to go back and attack Misrata again. You know, they've regrouped. He apparently has mercenaries who are willing to fight for money. And it's unfortunate. We've all said the same thing. It's been a uniform message from across the international community to Gaddafi. Please, have a ceasefire. Quit attacking your own people.
Okay. Points 1 and 2. Please Please stop attacking your own people and have a ceasefire. So on my Western narrative, let's see where those fall in. To stop attacking your own people. Okay. Well, there's no investigative journalism, basically, in the level of violence Gaddafi forces inflicted. In general, the violence was directed at enemy fighters because in Misrata, 90% of the bodies, according to a credible source, were male fighter age, which would not indicate a massacre. Let's see, and again, but where specifically do we talk about the massacre justification? Stop killing our own people. All claims of government atrocities accepted at face value, underplayed. This is all part of discounting and caricaturing of the opponent. There you go. Because in a civil war, there is going to be casualties. And right at the moment, it's basically NATO, largely NATO fighting directly against the Gaddafi regime, pushing them back. And it's certainly a hot conflict, and they're have made repeated efforts to negotiate, and the rebels have rejected each one. And she suppresses that fact. So here is another example of information leaking out, which I believe will hopefully will be powerful. Let's go ahead and like it.
Gaddafi nationalized key sectors of the oil resources and negotiated fair prices within OPEC for oil-producing countries. He used the oil revenues to build schools, universities, hospitals, and much-needed infrastructure. Before Gaddafi, fewer than 1/5 of Libyans were literate, no access to education for the majority of people, and then after Gaddafi, free quality education system, including university, and the literacy rate rose to 83%. Libya has free healthcare. All people, including the rebels, have access to doctors, hospitals, clinics, and medicines free of charge. If a Libyan needs surgery that is unavailable in Libya, funding is provided for the surgery to be carried out overseas. Soon after the revolution, basic food items were subsidized and electricity was made available throughout the country. Huge irrigation projects were established in order to support the drive towards agriculture development and self-sufficiency in food production. Gaddafi initiated the construction of the Great Man-Made River, referred to in the Guinness Book of Records as a wonder of the modern world. This gigantic river has managed to turn the coastal desert green.
In its early days, skeptics called it the Great Madman's River, a reference to the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi and its enormous expense, billions of dollars.
Any Libyan who wanted to become a farmer was and still is given free use of land, house, farm equipment, livestock, and seeds. Gaddafi vowed to house every Libyan, many of whom were still living in tents and houses made out of oil drums. He also vowed that his own parents, who lived in a tent, would not be housed until every Libyan was housed.
His mother had only one complaint. Her son insists that they remain in their tent until every Libyan is properly housed.
He fulfilled that promise, his own father dying before he had the opportunity to move him into a home. Large-scale housing construction took place right across the country, all Libyans being given a house or apartment to live in for free. Under the leadership of Gaddafi, Libya has attained the highest standard of living in Africa, rated on the UN's HDI ahead of Russia, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia. In 2007, in an article which appeared in the African Executive magazine, it was noted that Libya, unlike other oil-producing countries such as Nigeria, utilized the revenue from its oil to develop its country. Gaddafi believes that economic democracy can only be achieved when the GDP of a country benefits all of its citizens, and when the country's wealth is dispersed to every single citizen. Today, money from Libya's oil revenue is directly deposited into the bank account of every Libyan. Gaddafi is dedicated to the emancipation of Libyan women, encouraging them to participate in all aspects of political life. The revolution ensured that women gained full access to education and has actively encouraged acceptance of female paid employment. Libya is a very traditional society, and these moves by Gaddafi have been met with stiff resistance, especially by the forces in Benghazi. He opposed the U.S. invasion of Iraq and condemned those Arab leaders who supported the so-called coalition of the willing, earning the wrath of the Saudi monarchy when he said that the Kaaba was under the yoke of American occupation, and questioned what meaning the Hajj has for Muslims as long as the American occupation of the sacred house of God continues.
Also, Gaddafi tried to kill the Sauds in 2003, supposedly.
Gaddafi was the first and only leader in the Arab world to formally apologize for the Arab rule in the trade and capture of Africans. This infuriated Arab leaders, disgruntled with the arrogance of the Arab leaders and the continual thorn in their side, as he openly criticized their hypocrisy and
that is why the Arab League wants to get rid of him. They're made of a bunch of hypocrites and jerks. And I'm not just trying to cover for him. They have animosity because he has stirred the caca up in their countries. And some of that stirring would be laudable by U.S. standards, such as the freeing of South Africa from apartheid.
Servitude to Western imperialism, Gaddafi became isolated in the Arab world. He called on the African Union to give representation to Africans in the U.S., Europe, the Caribbean, and South America. In a recent speech, he said, "From now on, by the will of God, I will assign teams to search, investigate, and liaise with the Africans in Europe, and to check their situation. This is my duty and role towards the sons of Africa. I am a soldier for Africa. I am here for you, and I work for you. Therefore, I will not leave you, and I will follow up on your conditions."
So I think that's a good moment, if he doesn't mention it later, to talk about AFRICOM. So Libya and Zimbabwe are the only two countries that wouldn't join the U.S. new command, AFRICOM. Africa is a resource-rich land that's quickly being absorbed by Chinese contracts. And AFRICOM is an attempt to cement U.S. dominance over Africa in the resource wars, in my opinion, although it might have some beneficial attribute as well. But Libya clearly declaring themselves as a soldier for Africa and not affiliating with AFRICOM would be a convenient target to remove if it couldn't be an understanding achieved in that sphere.
One of Gaddafi's most controversial and difficult moves has been his determined drive to unite Africa with a shared vision for the true independence and liberation of the entire continent. He has contributed a great deal of his time, energy, and large sums of money to this project.
When war broke out in Uganda, the Congo, Ethiopia, and Eritrea, Gaddafi negotiated ceasefires, part of his long-held dream of creating a unified continent called the United States of Africa.
While the Libyan revolution has irritated the West since its inception, and although they never forgave Gaddafi for nationalizing Libya's oil, the most worrying move has been his call for the unification of Africa. After years of tireless effort on the part of Gaddafi and the Libyan revolutionary movement, the idea of a United States of Africa is gaining real momentum and support on the continent. In 1982, the World Mathaba was established in Libya. Mathaba means a gathering place for people with a common purpose.
Okay, we'll pause for that moment there. And now we'll... Okay, so what we've got here now is the... I want to discuss the 5 narratives that derive from this story unfolding in Libya. So one would account for extreme intervention in Libyan rebellion, leading to supporting regime change. The less extreme would be to support civilian protection while rooting for the rebels in the least destructive national transition possible. And generally these people do not believe and do not know about anything about Gaddafi or his achievements or the Libyan people's achievements over the years. The nuances and the shades of gray are unknown by most of the people that have essentially a civilian protection role. Although I think we all actually fall in that category once we examine it carefully. We want to have something leading towards electoral democracy because we have to come to some accommodation between the two sides. The rebels have to be able to participate in election, and so should the loyalists, most likely. So then we've got extreme non-intervention, which looks at these various factors that refute the official line, that there's actually many points of outrage towards the official line that might even support assassination. Women's position will suffer.